that's actually not true. Bill C-11 amends the Broadcasting Act by bringing the internet under its provisions. Now, in order to understand the effect of this, we have to understand why the Broadcasting Act was put in place in the first place. In the early 20th century, the Broadcasting Act was put in place to regulate TV and radio because there's a finite commodity. There's only a certain number of radio stations or a certain number of TV stations. And so in order to make sure that both official languages were represented within these platforms, the government determined that they should be regulated. So that French language and culture, namely, would be protected, that it would be given space within these spheres. Further to that, there was a definition given to Canadian content. We call it CanCon. And so there was this determination that a certain percentage of the content would be Canadian, CanCon. And the goal there was to protect our culture, to make sure that it wasn't just American content that was making its way up to Canada, but rather that Canadian content, things produced here, and a whole host of other criteria that are used, would be given space. Now, that's within the realm of TV and radio, which is limited. But now we're dealing with a space that is infinite. It's unlimited, the internet. Anybody who wants a website can have a website, no matter their language of choice. Anybody who wants to have a YouTube channel can have a YouTube channel. Anybody who wants to have a space within TikTok or Instagram, etc., can have a space. We are no longer dealing with a finite resource. The government doesn't need to regulate which content then should be prioritized and which content shouldn't be, because we're no longer dealing with limitations. There's space for everyone. And I would plead with the government to perhaps look back on the record of what the former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien had to say with regard to this. In 1999, he faced a similar question around the internet and whether or not it should be regulated. And after undergoing thorough investigation and a public inquiry, the determination was made that it should not be. He determined that the internet was so different than TV and radio that to treat it the same would actually be to stifle progress. And so after numerous public consultations, because there have been many done since Chrétien, here we are, willing to function in a regressive way rather than maintaining the progressive stance that was taken by the former Jean Chrétien. Now, at that time, I'll read what the directive stated in 1999. It said this: the Commission, the CRTC, expects that the exemption of these services, internet, will enable continued growth and development of the new media industries in Canada, thereby contributing to the achievement of the broadcasting policy objectives, including access to these services by Canadians. In other words, the determination was made that the internet would not be scoped into the Broadcasting Act, that it would not be regulated. And the reason for that was because there was this belief that innovation would take place if it was left alone, that advancement would take place if it was left alone, that growth would take place if it was left alone, that opportunity would be seized by all sorts of people from all sorts of regions with all sorts of backgrounds and from all different linguistic ways. I would invite this government to consider its regressive stance and to pull this legislation. On the internet, everyone has a spot to showcase their talent. On the internet, every single individual in this country has an opportunity to thrive should they wish to. Most people in this country have a smart device. You need nothing more than to showcase talent and make a name for yourself. The gatekeepers have been removed. In fact, it's never been easier for Canadians to succeed. It's never been easier for creators from a variety of linguistic and cultural backgrounds to reach not just a Canadian audience, but a global audience. So for this legislation to build walls around these individuals and keep them hemmed in within Canada is so egregious that it's hard for one to even fathom the reason for such legislation. Why would we punish our young creators? Why would we punish the next media content creators? Why would we insist that a regressive form must be kept, that progress shouldn't be celebrated? It baffles me, but I'm not the only one. It baffles Canadians from coast to coast, whether it's legal experts talking out on this topic, speaking out on this topic, or digital-first creators speaking out, or just Canadian consumers who simply just want choice. The fact is the gatekeepers have been removed. Where a creator used to have to put together a pitch or a package and bring it to the gatekeeper, such as CBC or Chorus Entertainment or Bell Media or Rogers, and they would have to plead with them to accept their package, to accept their idea, to accept their creativity. That used to be the way it was done. But now with the internet, we've entered this magical space where creators, innovators, thought leaders get to put their content out there and allow the Canadian people themselves to determine whether they like it or not, whether they want to watch it or not. We've removed the gatekeepers. It's incredible. And instead of celebrating just how amazing that is, this government is hell-bent on putting legislation in place to make sure that we maintain these old, antiquated ways.
Shame.
Why? Why? Isn't the very nature of the arts something that should propel us into the future? Something that should have forward momentum? Something that should be creative and innovative in nature? Isn't that the whole point of the arts? So why would we hem these individuals in? For the minister to say that this bill somehow modernizes the Broadcasting Act is incredibly disingenuous, as I have laid out. The minister is failing to account for the tremendous progress that has been made, the creativity that has been allowed to flow. Take, for example, Justin Bieber. He went big in approximately 2013. And the way he went big was because he put out a few songs on YouTube, and he got discovered. He didn't have to put together a big media package, though he could. He didn't have to depend on gatekeepers to either accept him or reject him, but rather he could put his talent out there. And his talent was discovered, and we know that he went big, and he's a Canadian artist that we're proud of. There are many more like him who are aspiring. And by putting a bill like this in place, by putting Bill C-11 in place, what we're saying to that next generation is don't bother. Don't bother. We want to subject that next generation to the same rules that we subjected artists to in the 1970s. Forget progress. If you want to engage in progress, perhaps consider moving to the United States of America or South Korea or the UK. But in Canada, Bill C-11 puts this massive banner that says we are opposed to innovation, we are opposed to progress, we are opposed to celebrating artists.
Shocking.